Welcome to Joe's Happy Hour, a show about markets and life hosted by Joe Fahmy. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be regarded as personalized investment advice or relied upon for any investment decisions. Joe Fahmy is an employee of Zor Capital, and he and his clients may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast. All opinions expressed by Joe are solely his own and do not reflect the opinions of Zor Capital. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on this program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Thank you and enjoy the show.
Tyas, Frantz.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. I wasn't expecting to be on camera today.
Podcast producer extraordinaire.
Yeah, do a lot of them. We're doing like 50 a week.
That's amazing. The world of podcasting is insane.
Yes.
You've taught me a lot about it, and I'm blown away by what is going on in the world. You produce some of the top podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts in the world. I'm sure there's a lot of people who want to learn a little bit about maybe from not start to finish, but for people who are interested in starting a podcast, what are some, first few steps that you would tell them in getting started?
Isn't it great that we live in a time when like information's just out there nowadays? It's like, it's so easy to get and so like do a Google search.
You can do open heart surgery on YouTube if you want. There's an 8-part. Once you get past the second video, the last 6 parts are great.
It seems like you could. It seems like it's just a matter of like pulling up the right video. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm excited by podcasts. I've been doing them for like 20 years, and at first they were just like an interesting side project. I was working for Apple, and Steve Jobs got on stage and said, "Hey, we're going to put podcasts inside of iTunes." And at the moment I was thinking, okay, I don't know exactly what this is, but it's going to be huge because Steve Jobs got on stage, and when he says we're doing this thing. So that night I recorded a podcast, and at the time I was big into like the magic world, magicians and performing art.
Okay.
So I recorded this whole podcast about magic, and I went to a website that sold magic tricks. And I said, hey, I've got this podcast. Literally, this was the night after they had announced it. So it's like, it's already done. I've recorded it. It was only audio. And I was like, I've got this podcast. Why don't we release it on your guys' website? And you guys pay me to do it. Like literally my first podcast was sponsored, like day one. I monetized instantly. And yeah, and it was great. And it was totally fun. And the thing that's trippy is you don't realize that there's people watching because you can't see them through the camera. And then like you go to a convention somewhere and they're like, hey, I've been listening to all your stuff. And they know everything about you, and it's super weird. Yeah. But only in, I would say, the last 2 years has it gotten really exciting. And if you look at, we just passed the elections. If you look at like Trump going on Joe Rogan's podcast and Kamala Harris deciding not to, and what that did versus them being on mainstream media, it didn't seem to matter at all.
I think it's fascinating because some people have joked that Barron Trump had a lot to do with the election and podcasting because he pushed his dad to go on Theo Von's podcast, which is huge with the younger generation, and he pushed him to go on Joe Rogan. And then Joe Rogan has Vance, Elon Musk, and Trump in 1 week, which is mind-blowing. And a lot of people have said that affected the election, not only them going on, but Harris not going on. I think that's a very powerful statement, but not that far off.
I think there's something to question around mainstream media. And on the back of COVID and people feeling like they were locked up and that there was so much misinformation that was fed to them and that they can't trust mainstream media sources anymore, it just dawned on me that the disclaimer is my voice. By the way, if you're listening to this and you heard my voice in the disclaimer, yep, that was my voice.
Welcome to Joe's Happy Hour.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, now we have to change the voice.
So I feel like people have lost a lot of faith in mainstream media.
Yeah.
And in a similar way to how hotels have gotten chewed away by Airbnb and VRBO, and transportation, as far as like taxi cabs, have gotten eaten away by Uber and Lyft. It almost seems like media is getting eaten away by independent contractors that want to put out their own content. And because they have nothing, they have no golden handcuffs on them. They can move at a speed that nobody else can. They're not afraid of like upsetting their sponsors because they can choose their own. They're
Right.
literally the
Or
boss of the network.
There's no network to or owners of the network to report to.
Yeah.
Now, what about the opposite or pushback on that? That some people will say Joe Rogan, for example, might be so they don't trust the media because of misinformation. What about the people who say the podcast might be spreading misinformation for people who are, and I love Joe Rogan, by the way, but who are saying maybe he's pushing or whatever the podcast they're listening to is not exactly.
They're right. They're absolutely right. The thing about like freedom is that it takes a level of responsibility to deal with it, right? So if you trust the government to like check out everything on your food, like, yeah, you'll have safer food, and the food's going to be more expensive and more limited in supply and all the bad stuff that comes with it. But it will be safer. But you now have a father figure that everything is getting filtered through this parental guidance module, right?
Yeah.
And so like, absolutely, like there's going to be a tremendous amount of people being wrong. And now so it becomes on the listener's responsibility
to filter that out or to use their own discretion of who they trust. Because I would like to think over time, you listen to someone, you get their mannerisms, you hear what they're saying. Over time, you leave it up to the person's discretion to filter out who they trust, who they don't, and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, you could take it, the argument ad absurdum would be like, well, maybe the government should get involved in all of our conversations because people could say something misleading in our conversations. It's like, well, how far do you want to go with it until you have to take responsibility for your own decisions? And so anyways, that's my opinion. But let me ask you, you've recently launched this podcast, which is kind of how we created a friendship.
Yeah.
Why?
I have always wanted to do one because I'm mostly involved in finance, and I have a life outside of finance, and it is intense managing money for people and watching the stock market and all the pressures of all that. And I'm a big fan of work hard, play hard, and being well-rounded, not just my face, but in general in life. So my point is that I have friends, and we have some mutual friends in music and in sports, and I've met some great people through my life, and I want to have interesting conversations with these people. So I said, what better way to do this than the podcast medium? Because that seems to be, I think you coined the term, the future of media, the future of how information is being disseminated. I mean, it's not that far off. So this is a way to do it and have some fun with it and see what happens with it. If you build an audience, great. If it's, worst case scenario, I have a whole bunch of fun conversations with my friends.
Now, you've done a bunch of media already. You've done mainstream media and quite a bit of it.
Yeah.
What's been the difference within the experience of doing like a few podcasts versus that?
I don't mind doing that, and I'm very honored when they ask me to do that. The problem is it's time constraint, and you have sometimes they have certain topics they want you to talk about, where, to your point about a podcast, it's wide open. So I've also shown up sometimes in the green room, and they say, hey, the president has a press conference, and you're getting bumped. And there's three of us on a panel, and we all have to go home. So there's a lot of restrictions where doing things on your own, whether it's YouTube or just audio or whatever, there's no restrictions. You can talk about whatever you want. There's no time constraint. There's no, if you're there on a panel, you have to be respectful of other people speaking. So as much as I love doing that, this gives you way more flexibility and way more leeway to just do whatever you want.
My old man still does not understand what a podcast is. And I've tried to explain it many times to my failure. And I'm curious, like, you obviously know what a podcast is, or you wouldn't have been interested in it. So what are the podcasts that you've followed mostly you must like the medium, or you wouldn't have decided to jump into it?
I think it's me realizing, and I think I asked you, am I too late to this? And you're saying it's just getting started, or something to that effect. I don't want to, put words in your mouth, but I am getting more and more into some of the, a lot of the comedians I used to, when Adam Carolla and Mark Maron and Bill Burr with his Monday morning, now Thursday podcast. Like, I was just more of just humor. And I think people have different objectives. Some people just want to chill on their car ride to work, on a treadmill, whatever. And then some people want news, or they want self-help, or they want to learn. Peter Attia has a great one on and it's amazing.
The Drive, I think is what they call it.
Yeah, like 30-year cancer surgeon, now an expert in longevity. And people love that, and Huberman and all these people who have great podcasts. So some people just want to laugh, some people want to be entertained, some people want to learn. And of course, Joe Rogan is literally a cultural icon. And it's amazing what he's created. I was going to ask you about that. It's amazing what he's created. And I'm saying, okay, I'm lucky enough to know some great people. I want to try it out, not to be the next Joe Rogan, but just to have some fun conversations, sort of as a release or relief from the stress of what I do on a day-to-day basis. So you've built an amazing studio here. You have several studios here, which is great. And it gives me opportunity where I don't have to worry about lights and camera and microphones and all the cool stuff. I can just plop my ass in the chair and record. So not to simplify it, but it's...
I mean, that's the dream, right? Like a lot of people are like, oh, I could... It's weird how everybody wants to do everything, and yet the more you learn, the more you don't know. I think they have the example of the square root, the diameter of a circle versus the... What
circumference?
Circumference. Thank you. Jeez, could not get it out. Like the idea being like that as you learn, you're learning on the diameter, and all that it impacts is the circumference, which is what you don't know. So as you learn more, you realize how much more is outside of your range of knowledge.
It's really, when you look into doing a podcast, I think most people's hesitation is it's intimidating, it's too much work, it's overwhelming, and all this stuff. And you told me three things: come up with a name, come up with a logo, and record. I think that's great advice because you just want to at least put out content and not worry about the comments and what people are going to think and what my friends are going to think and what my family and what random strangers on the internet are going to say. There's so many things that are overwhelming in people's mind. And I finally just said, okay, came up with a name. It's simple. The logo I think is pretty cool. And I'm now putting together some recording. They're not time sensitive. So if I record and I want to save 5 episodes in the bank and we can put them out. But the thing I want to ask you is the number one thing you told me is consistency. Can you talk a little bit about that, about the success behind a podcast, how consistency is important?
Yeah. The two big mistakes that everybody makes is they don't start it and then they are not consistent with it. And I would love to say this is podcast specific, but this is everything. This is life.
That's life.
This is life. This is, hey, I'm going to go to the gym and then I'm going to keep working out, right? Like it's if everybody did those two things, they would all be ripped. Hey, I'm going to create a budget and I'm going to stick to it.
Yeah.
Like this is how you solve almost all your problems if you can pull off this one thing. And we should call it just discipline.
Yeah.
But it's everywhere. And there's that, the Book of Five Rings, I think Musashi was the guy that wrote it.
Yeah.
But once you know the way, you see it in all things is one of the famous quotes from it. So very similar to that. It's just like, you've got to make a decision, do the very minimum to get that ball rolling because the momentum is so hard to start. It's much easier. So like if you were to decide everything has to be perfect, but let's use the gym as the analogy, right?
Yeah.
Everything has to be perfect before I go to the gym. I got to get the whoop strap and like
the outfits and the
whole thing,
and
right?
Everything, yeah.
It's like, do you have shoes that you can run in? Go to the gym. Like it should be the most minimum amount that is required.
Put on some sneakers and get off your ass. Yeah, because my workout routine is awesome. I work out on Monday, I work out on Tuesday, and Wednesday I take 3 weeks off.
Ooh, I like that.
And I'm very consistent with that. So that's, to your point, the advice you gave me on podcasts also works with everything in life, consistency. So the number one thing you would say is record and be consistent about it.
Yeah, yeah. And a lot of people will make the mistake on the consistency in both directions, and they don't consider that. They'll consider, well, it's a mistake to stop, which is correct. It is a mistake. But they will also go the other direction, and they'll be like, you know what? This week I'm going to record 10 shows, and that's also an error because like if you were to record and put out 10 shows, the algorithm's going to be like, this guy's a machine. He's an animal. I'm going to promote the heck out of this show, right? And it will. It will promote it. It will be seen more, and then the next week it'll say, oh, this guy stopped.
So the algorithm recognizes your consistency almost?
Yeah. So there is officially no information on on what the algorithms have in them. And from what I understand, at this point, humans hardly even know. Like it's not like a human's going in there and like reprogramming it. Like a lot of these are programmed by AIs at this point.
Okay.
But what we do, we see trends across different creators, and then we can identify those and go like, oh, this is interesting. So for example, We've seen so many times that people will struggle on YouTube, and then at 6 months, almost on the dot, at 6 months, if they're consistent, their content gets a boost. And then again, at a year, their content gets a boost.
So it's almost like AI is rewarding you for consistency.
Well, if you think about like its job is to retain viewers on the platform for as long as possible.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's a risk of, okay, let's say I give Joe, I send a bunch of viewers to Joe because they love his content, right?
Yeah.
And you blow up in the first 3 days you're on the platform and you're like,
Yeah.
I've got this. And then you jump off the platform with all your viewers. Like now the algorithm's just hurt itself. So the algorithm's evolving to learn how to retain its
Viewership.
And so if it's tried that, which it probably has, it then goes, you know what? If I don't give them a bunch of viewers until 6 months and then another at a year, then they're now I've made them much more likely of staying on our platform. And so it's this smart system that is constantly like, and there's thousands of metrics as far as what it's doing. But yeah, it does reward consistency.
That's amazing. So I don't want to simplify this because I know they asked Peter Attia, 30 years of research. Okay, so can you sum it up in a few steps? And he's like, it's not that simple, And so I don't want to, put down you're an expert and you've been doing this for a long time. For someone who's interested in starting one, what are like 3 or 4 basic steps for start? Because I know it used to only be audio. And I'm a fan of also doing the video because I think 90% of communication is body language, and I think it's important for people to put a face to a name and understand. You can tell a lot by from the video. So, what are some simple steps? Because I know some people want to start it, but they're too intimidated or just don't ever get started.
So, reduce as much friction as you can. Right?
Yeah.
Don't get the whoop strap or everything else. Just reduce the friction that you can. And that might mean looking at what you currently have and saying, you know what I've got? I've got an iPhone. Like, okay, if that's what you got, like I can help you start a podcast with just your iPhone and like open up the Notes app. There's a recording feature in there. Start recording. It could be that simple, right? Now, if you want to start with like this, like this would be a large capital investment, right? And and some people have different levels of resources within that. And so offloading that to somebody else makes sense for a lot of people, but it doesn't make sense for everybody.
Right.
Some people can afford an editor off the bat. Other people can't. I get it. But you don't need all that stuff. You can start with nothing, but it's going to take you longer, as it is with everything. It's that triangle. What do they call that? The
food pyramid? I'm like, I just see carbs everywhere. No.
There's 3 options. You can have it fast, you can have it quick, or you can have it high quality. You get to pick 2 of those, but you can't have all 3, right? So some people will want it. They'll want it fast and they'll want it high quality, but that means it's going to be really expensive, or it'll be high cost. If they want it to be cheap and they want it fast, that means it's going to be really low quality, right? You get 2 of those 3 on that triangle. And you suffer the consequence of the other one.
Okay.
Right? And so like, not to throw you under the bus here, but like we are of high quality and we are fast.
Yeah.
But we're not cheap. Like that's there's
You're
a
not
capital.
throwing me under the bus.
Well, I mean, you're spending money while I'm telling you could start this with a phone, right? It's just dramatically lower quality. So decide what the sacrifice is going to be. And it might be, hey, I'm sacrificing quality for speed, or I'm gonna take forever to launch this, but it'll still be cost effective.
I'm paying for the, my hesitation from doing this all the time was all of those things going through my mind. Like, what mic do I buy? What do I do for a logo? What cameras do I buy? My lighting sucks. I don't know how to, I'm working at an office and there's a window on one side with light. These are all the things and they're all bullshit like excuses, but then they start to stack up and I get overwhelmed and say, well, whatever. I'll worry about this another time. Now that it's sort of a plug and play, it's a great thing for me. But if someone's starting iPhone, tripod for an iPhone, and start recording, and when they're done with that video, then what?
So then, how nerdy do you want me to get?
Let's get nerdy.
Okay. So what what podcasts are is something called an RSS feed.
Okay.
Which is a website that's similar to like a blog. It like you update it, you put another layer, another thing into it, And in this case, the thing you're putting into it is that recording.
Okay.
A lot of places have made this a lot simpler. This used to involve HTML coding, and now there's websites that will just do this for you. But basically, you take that content, you put it into this blog, which is really called an RSS feed, and then you give that feed to iTunes and Spotify and iHeartRadio and all the aggregators out there, and they go and they pull that content and they send it out to their users.
So I was under the impression a while ago, it was like 5-10 years ago, somebody said record, and this was, let's say, just audio, and then put it into a host, Libsyn or Stitcher, and then that automatically, is that considered the RSS feed that automatically puts it to all the different platforms? Is that simplifying what you're saying?
It's a service that is making that RSS feed for you. They're also fixing a problem that podcasts ran into when they were created. So initially, people would take that audio file and they'd upload it to their own website. And so when it went out to iTunes and Spotify, everybody would download the episode at the exact same moment, and it would crash the website because web servers weren't designed to handle huge traffic.
So those services are to host all of that traffic?
Yes.
Okay.
So they're designed specifically to handle this massive burst of downloads all at one moment.
Okay.
Without crashing anything.
So you record, but now you're telling me not the future, but it's shifting more to Spotify as the host platform?
Well, Spotify is dumping more money into podcasts than anybody else on the planet, both in their infrastructure. They're buying those hosting companies. Anchor was a big one, and they purchased it. They're offering hosting for free now, which I don't know of any. Well, I'm sure there's probably somebody else who's doing it, but no one's doing it at their quality. They're buying up shows. They bought up Rogan. They're buying, they're throwing money at it. They believe that this is going to be a huge, huge investment in the future of their
content.
Content.
Their recent earnings were super strong. The stock's been doing well. Not investment advice, but I think 680 million subscribers, and Netflix is like 280, somewhere around there is I think the latest numbers. But
what is the story with the not investment advice thing? Why are you financial people handcuffed? What's going on there?
Every disclaimer should just say, don't be an idiot. We know the coffee is hot, but you have to, McDonald's has to say coffee is hot because it spilled on some lady and she sued him for God knows how much money. So it's such a, in the world of finance, there's so much compliance and red tape. So you cover your ass by saying this is not investment advice. Consult your,
Is that disclaimer, is that required by law, or is that just good practice at this point?
Both. Our compliance people say that. That's why even every mutual fund, they'll put their numbers that are audited and they'll say past performance is not indicative of future results because it's what's required by the regulators and to, just good practice as well.
At what point are you allowed to give advice? Official advice?
To clients that pay you, I guess. Yeah,
okay. So if I slide a penny across this table.
I'm pushing it back. This is not investment advice.
That's return on my investment. I broke even.
I don't know. It's just compliance is a nightmare. So you just have to cover your ass. That's it.
Yeah.
So
see, I feel like as I just touted the benefits of the anarchist viewpoint within podcasting and so many other things where it's you got to take responsibility for yourself.
Yeah, no, I know. But we were talking about Spotify. So now you
fine,
record.
Get us back on track.
I'm trying. So now you record on, now it's more audio and video.
Well, it's still, believe it or not, it's still about 1,000 times to 1 on audio to video. Audio is consumed so much more than video. And people will come in here and they'll be like, you've got 1,200 watts of lighting and screens and graphics. And just the glass on these cameras are crazy expensive, the lenses, when I say glass. And they're like, so why are you investing in video when everything's audio? Because it is. The data says
1,000 to 1 more people are listening to podcasts than watching.
Yes.
Okay, so go ahead.
So the reason people are shooting it on video is it future-proofs it. If video does take over, which I don't think it's going to, simply because of the multitasking ability of listening to audio while you're driving, while you're at the gym, while you're buying groceries. So I don't think it's going to overtake it. However, it's also really great if you're trying to market your content. People do consume shorts, short clips under a minute. Voracious. I can't talk.
More, but Joe Rogan
with ferocity.
Joe Rogan's 3 hours, but most people are consuming the 2 to 6 minute type of videos.
Yeah. So that's why we shoot it in video, is really for that marketing stuff. People do want it in video content, but when you look at them consuming it, the drop-off rate for video is crazy high. People will watch a few minutes of it and then turn it off.
But listening is much better.
They go crazy. They listen to it. Yeah, the
so
listening retention's high.
you record, you post it on a hosting platform?
Yes.
Okay. Spotify's a pretty solid one?
Spotify's a very solid one, although we work with almost everybody. So a lot of our clients come in with existing podcasts, and so they'll say, hey, I'm using Podbean, I'm using Buzzsprout, I'm using Libsyn. Like we know them all. Okay. And we know how to use them. And they all have their own unique benefits and drawbacks, as everything does.
So now you host it, and then you put it out. Now the next question is, how do you build an audience?
Good question. Hard question.
I know it's not easy.
Because this is the Peter
like 7 people are going to watch
simple.
This. Maybe 8 now.
It's so simple. Okay, so the building the audience thing. Step 1, have a really good product. And that I could go into like a book easily of just have a good product, right? Do not start marketing your stuff if you don't have a great podcast. The product is the podcast in this capacity, right? Okay. I'm not talking about like the monetization. That's a different subject. But don't even try to grow it until you're like, okay, I'm happy with what I have, right? That means you should have 20, 30, 50, 100 shows, right? Done. And sitting there ready to be consumed. If somebody goes and they go and watch one and there's nothing else to watch, you don't have a great product. So
going back to the consistency.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So have a great product. Then the next one, and this is what, if you were to just type this in a Google search, what will come up is get on other people's podcasts. The reason is the people that are consuming that product, the other person's podcast, is highly likely to be the person that might be interested in yours. And they're less likely to jump to a random podcast and much more likely to watch one where there's somebody that they're familiar with. So if you're on somebody else's show for an hour, their audience at least knows you for an hour's worth.
So Joe Rogan's the number 1 podcast, Tucker Carlson's the number 2. By him having Tucker Carlson on, he gets a lot of that audience as an example of what you're talking about. Okay.
Yeah. And then there's a bunch of tricks after that point. Like then we get more and more nuanced, right? So I could, for example, go on another person's show and create a infographic or a ebook that I could give to those audience members, right? So on that show, I might say, hey, just for your audience, I put together this great ebook because it's related to finance, and I know that's what your audience is interested in. And so all they've got to do to check it out is go to my website, and I have it for them, and they can get it right there, right? And when they go to the website, it has a email captcha to get the free thing. And now I'm going to email them, hey, this podcast just came out, right? So now that's another way of, like, I'm trying to capture their audience. Another way of doing it would be, let's say I'm on your podcast, right? And I want to promote my own podcast. So I've gotten to that step. Maybe I'll go out onto YouTube and I'll buy ads that I'm going to run on your podcast, and I'm going to use shorts that I've made of our interview together on your show. I'm going to run it on your show. So now they're watching your show. They already love you, right? But I'm trying to steal that audience. So when they click on that ad, it takes them over to my show where I'm featuring stuff that has your content in it. So now they're much more likely to start watching some of my content. And so that's another way of like siphoning the audience over.
These are nuanced ways to grow your audience.
Yes. Okay. And then there's a very aggressive ways. Like the biggest podcasts in the world, I'll use something called, by the way, I'm giving away some really crazy stuff that most people don't know about. This is industry secret stuff. They use something called clipping services. And what clipping services are is people that they basically work on TikTok. They take one of your episodes, they chop it up into tiny, tiny little segments, and they run it over their 50 different channels that they've got on TikTok. And then there's an army of different people that each have 50 channels, right? So imagine just like millions and millions of these short videos.
Like spreading like gremlins.
Yes. And they basically throw this stuff out there, they track a link, and then they can see how many audience members they send you based off of all these shorts they create, and they bill you based on how much traffic they're sending you. It's called a clipping service. And so like if you're looking at any of the really big guys, they all have this stuff taking place, with maybe Rogan as an exception. But all the trendy, especially like young hip guys, they're all doing this.
Wow. Okay. If that's too much to give away, we can cut that out.
The thing is, an audience, like if you go, one, they've got a ton of money to drop on this stuff. We're talking like some of these guys will put like $1 million into this. So there's not a lot of people that can afford it. Secondly, is you need to know how to contact these people. Good luck. So anyways, it's not super easy. And these are the hard stuff to do. Those are things that are not average. In fact, even just running an ad on YouTube, I could just say that, and 99% of people aren't going to do it. Like if you were to give out financial advice on here, the best financial advice on the planet, like what percentage is actually going to do it?
Yeah.
It's almost none.
Right.
It's tragic, but it is what it is. Like that's just the nature of humanity. Is like I can give out it's weird to me that people sell courses. With that being said, I'm about to make a course on podcasting, but it's weird to me that they sell courses because I'll tell you anything for free. I expect you're probably not going to do it.
Yeah. It's
sad.
a great point. So Joe Rogan, cultural phenomenon. Can you take us through what he's done to build that? I know he started, he's a comedian. From what I understand, started interviewing comedians, got into MMA, UFC, and then kept growing his audience. But can you touch upon like a quick summary of what he's done that's made him the best?
I can give you a few things. I mean, first off, luck. Like
you need luck
is a big factor for him.
Yeah.
And for everybody else. So one, he was early to the game. He was not the first to the game. Like This American Life started in 1995. That's before podcasts technically launched, right? So they were doing a radio show that they converted in. They were way before Rogan was. But he was still early. And so he was still blue ocean versus red ocean, as we learned about on a previous episode of somebody's podcast. He was still a blue ocean guy. And then... So that was one of the big factors. A second big factor is his consistency has been off the charts, and it's very long duration. He's doing like 3-hour episodes 3 to 4 times a week. That's remarkable to do for years and years. And because of it, I think he currently has the largest catalog of podcasts on the planet right now. I think he's number one, and the guy that's going to overtake him shoots at this same studio. But he's releasing 3 episodes a day with the intent of catching up to Joe.
Wow.
And he will.
Okay.
And then another thing that Joe Rogan did that was a differentiator. I'm big on these differentiators. I think you can't survive if you don't figure out what makes you niche. Another big one for him was he was a no holds barred show. And when he started off, that was pretty taboo to be able to say whatever you wanted. Like there was no censoring within that. Today, that's a little bit more common, but still sometimes held back. Like one of Joe Rogan's early sponsors was Fleshlight, a sex toy, right? Was one of his early sponsors. And so that's another factor was he was no holds barred. You would hear stuff on his show you couldn't hear anywhere else. He had a previously established audience. That's a huge advantage. Although he did specify he went comedians first long before he moved into MMA.
His previous established audience was his comedy audience from doing stand-up?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then there was one other one on the tip of my tongue.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's all right. It's gone now.
And then MMA went from interviewing comedians, MMA.
Yeah.
I feel like that Elon Musk interview, in my opinion, from the little I have observed, is that 10,000 hours behind overnight or 10 years behind overnight success, because the number of people who've never heard of Joe Rogan who are huge Elon Musk fans were like, do you see that guy smoking weed on the podcast? And all of a sudden, after that, I think the Spotify first contract came.
Yeah.
I think.
But a lot of that was just that he had so much momentum for such a long period of time that he had, eventually you get great guests on, and then the great guests become justification for other people to come on that are great guests.
Okay.
Like he's had Bernie Sanders, he's had everybody, right? And so then it's slightly less traumatic for Donald Trump, which I believe is now his largest episode ever, which just happened. So it's a little less scary for Donald Trump to come on. And Donald Trump carries him over the 100 million, like well over 100 million views, which, I mean, if you look at the greatest TV shows in history, like, nope, he's winning. Joe Rogan's winning. The other thing that Joe Rogan does that is a differentiator for him, and this is kind of his superpower. This is the thing that I don't think people can clone, is that he's capable of having a 3-hour conversation with somebody that it basically doesn't talk. It reminds me a little bit of like how professional wrestling, like a good professional wrestler could fight a broom and make it look like the broom is winning. Joe Rogan is capable of having a conversation with somebody that cannot have a conversation with him and making it feel like it's a decent conversation for 3 hours.
So he has the ability to extract or dig that conversation out of them, or is it a gift of...
He's talking to himself. When he has a bad guest on, Joe can cover the 3 hours by himself. And it's very rare to be able to see somebody who can do that. Yeah. I've also run like analytics on Joe Rogan, and like one of the things that he does that's really weird that I haven't exactly been able to put my finger on is he asks way less questions than almost any podcaster. He would get them to automatically respond without actually saying the question. And I find that fascinating.
That is fascinating. So can we talk about another great podcast you produce here with Sean Kelly's podcast, Digital Marketing Hour?
Digital Social Hour.
Digital Social Hour, sorry. I love his story. I think it's amazing. He's just a young kid who just grinds and records and has just, I think he's putting the 10,000 hours or 10 years in he did it in a very brief time. Can you talk a little bit about his success?
Yeah, so he's, I think, like 2 years in, and he's going to be huge. I talk to him about it all the time. I learn stuff from him all the time because the guy's just doing reps like nobody else on the planet. So his story is he launched a podcast and the podcast failed. He realized that he couldn't get good guests on because he didn't have a good network. We lost your logo.
I lost my logo. This one's nicer.
It's a generic Apple background. He didn't have a big audience, and so he went out and started networking, and he decided, I've got to network like crazy. And what's interesting about Sean over a lot of people is he just basically decides, I'm going to do this. I'm willing to pay this, whatever that cost is. That cost might be his time. It could be his money. It could be his relationships. It's something. He defines that cost, and he was willing to pay it.
So he started, and when you say it failed, like, what do you mean? He just didn't...
He started a podcast, and it didn't work.
It didn't work.
It didn't work. So he gave himself 2 years to build his network.
And he says, I'm going to make this happen, or die. Go home or die.
So he basically starts going to mixer events and social events and starts building up his network. And he starts messaging people and like connecting with people for 2 years, building this empire of a network. And then he relaunches the podcast and records like 27 episodes a week-ish.
A machine.
Incredible. He's releasing 3 episodes a day, and he's backlogged for months. So that gives you an idea of how much he's putting out there.
And you told me he is the #1 podcast on Apple Podcasts in the self-improvement category? Or one of the top
so
ones?
It was interesting. He was #1 in one category. He then decided to change categories, which I don't understand why you would do that. And then within like a couple of weeks, he was #1 in the new category that he had chosen.
Do you have to choose a category?
Yeah, you have to put a category in there.
So when you post it, you want to, and how many are there to choose
There's a
from?
bunch of different genres.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So he changed genres in the middle.
He changed and still was the #1.
Yeah. Yeah. And he won Podcaster of the Year this year. Here's the thing. Sorry, Sean, if you're watching this. I think Sean is deeply autistic. And I think we look at autism as like a defect, but
there's a wide spectrum.
Bingo. And it's sometimes a superpower, right? Like if you decide, it can be a great thing.
Sure.
And I think he looks at something and goes, I'm going to focus on this like nobody's business. He's decided what he's willing to sacrifice. He has a budget on how much he's willing to put out per episode. And let me tell you, it's a lot more than I'd be willing to spend. He goes for it, and he's going to win.
I've noticed I love success, and there's a great expression, success leaves clues. So don't try to reinvent the wheel. Find someone who's successful at something and do it with your own style. So it's kind of like, I want to lose weight. Oh, well, no shit, diet and exercise. Eat an apple and go for a walk. Like, it's not that complicated, but find someone who's successful at something. And I've studied Carl Icahn, who's one of the best money managers, Kobe Bryant. And so it doesn't matter what vocation they're in. And one thing about all these amazing, successful people talk about is you have to have a little bit of an obsession. Because if you want to be great, you have to sacrifice and you have to be obsessed. And I find that Sean's got a little bit of that, or a lot of that in him.
Yeah. I wonder, and this is a little off podcasting, which I know is what we've been sticking to.
All right.
But I wonder if the issue with life in my head right now, one of these really problematic dichotomies is that if you set goals, you're automatically saying that your current existence isn't good enough. The statement of a goal of saying, I want this in the future, is saying that my present is not as good as my future could be. And therefore, I'm not truly grateful for everything that I have in my current existence.
Okay.
Right. And everybody says, like, all these old philosophy books says, like, if you want a happy life, stay in the present moment, be happy for what you have, show gratitude. Like, that's the secret to the happiness side of this equation. But then everybody else is like, well, to have purpose, you need these goals, you need ambition, you need to fight for all this stuff. And sometimes I'm like, well, do you get either a happy life or a meaningful one? Is that the choice laid in front of all of us, where we get to either be grateful for what we have, or we get to grind like crazy and suffer through that grind in order to have something that other people have never had before?
But then when you get to that point, you have to make sure that you don't say, hey, is this it? And I think have no fulfillment.
But you've also set yourself up to obviously have no fulfillment because you have not been practicing staying in the present moment and being grateful. So you're going to get to the end. You're going to cross the finish line and then say, is this all there is?
I find a lot of people have a blueprint of what they want their life to be, and this is maybe where they're at. And how happy they are, or the opposite, how close they are to that blueprint. So if you say, this is what I want in life, and you're this far away, you're not happy. But if you're closer to that, deals with people's happiness and sense of fulfillment.
That's interesting because then you could say, hey, I'm happy exactly with what I have. You're in perfect happiness, but then the overlap is perfect. We had a guy sitting in your chair 2 days ago, huge business guy. I don't know if he was a billionaire, but he was high millions. And he was saying, he's just like, one of the weird things about like crossing the $100 million line is it feels like the same, you feel like the same guy at the $10 million line, and you feel like the same guy at the $1 million line. So you notice the number, like it changed on the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
But like you didn't change as a person. And you think there's going to be this like, oh, suddenly the clouds part and now you're wiser and you have friends, and no, nothing changed.
No, I think it just magnifies who you already are.
It might amplify what you can do.
Yeah, but if you're an asshole, you're just a richer asshole. If you're generous, you're just more generous. I mean, an example that I thought about with the whole blueprint is I have friends that say, okay, I need to make X amount of millions and I need to have this and this and that, and they're so far away and they're not happy. Then I have another friend who's from like Hicksville, Louisiana, and he was in a town of less than 1,000 people, and he makes not that much money a year in bartends, and he's like, I wasn't supposed to even achieve this, and he's the happiest person I know because his like level was here and he's like way past that. So he's super happy because in his mind, what he thought he was going to be, he's way past what he could have ever imagined. So
that sounds nice.
You have to be very careful. Like obviously want to have high standards, but you don't want to set them so far that your life is so far away and you're constantly depressed and struggling. He just surpassed what he could ever imagine. He's one of the happiest people I know.
Yeah, I think it also matters on how you define your terms. Like you could get rich by saying, you know what, I want to compete against my friends, right? And then when if you beat them, now you're just going to look at other people and be like, now I've got to compete against those people. And the game will never end. You'll never feel fulfilled.
Ever.
On the other hand, you could say, I really need to give back to this community. I need to make sure that these guys in Africa have wells or whatever the case may be. Yeah. So if I can make $100,000, I could then do this one. I could deliver on this promise, right? Like now you've set up a finish line you can cross. But if there's never a finish line, if it's just I want this many views, I want to be as rich as the next guy or the richest guy on the planet or whatever, like you're never going to win that game.
Oh, 100%. My dad taught me at a young age, someone's always going to have something better than you. So someone's going to have a better house and a nicer car and more money in the bank and this and that. But if you live your life comparing all, like, what's that expression?
Comparison's the thief of joy.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. It's if you live your life that way, to your point, okay, so now I have the nice car and I have this huge house, and you're like, oh, this person has a bigger this. And it's like you end up that's torture. That's like you're literally setting yourself up for depression and constantly comparison. Like you said, the thief of joy.
Yeah, I used to be a magician here in Vegas, and I used to think that was going to solve all my problems because I grew up poor as a kid, and I wanted to feel like important and successful, and like magic gives you I know something you don't know. I'm that power, you know, and so I just figured it would solve all my stuff. And one of the things I learned along that journey, besides the story we just told of like reaching the finish line doesn't necessarily mean fulfillment. Is that you don't just impact the audience impacts you, and it changes you. And you think you own this room, that you're controlling this environment, but you don't realize that the environment is also controlling you. And so if your goal is to be a billionaire, like, yes, you own that $1 billion, and it also owns you. You now have a responsibility around that income. If you create this giant business, that business also owns you. And so people don't necessarily think about the fact that as they reach their 1 million subscribers online, they think, oh, yay, that's going to be great. Well, now you've got a responsibility to those 1 million subscribers. It goes both directions.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I always think in terms of the stock market, the number of people I know who are obsessed with getting their account to a certain number and always obsessed with that. And they never leave their house. And on the weekends, they love the stock market. And look, I'm passionate about it, but you got to have a life. And they're just so obsessed. They're never going to spend any of that money. They're never going to enjoy themselves. They just want to grow their account to whatever it is, to like 500,000, 1 million, 2 million. Like and it's never enough. And they're actually some of the most it's sad because they're some of the most I don't know what the right word is, depressed, unfulfilled, whatever, because it's always an obsession with something, and they're obsessed with the stock market. And don't get me wrong, I know a lot of my audience loves the stock market, and I'm super passionate about it, but I love 3-day weekends. And when I say I wish the market was 4 days a week, every week, people are like, fuck you, we know 24 hours, this and that. And I'm like, is there nothing more to your life than making money, which you're never going to spend, and obsessing? Take a breath. Go outside and get some sunshine. Read a book. Tell someone you love them. Listen to some music. Go for a walk. Like, it gets to the point where that's one of my pet peeves, when people get so obsessed with that they lose track of everything else in their life.
Yeah. Although I think that if I were to live my life again, which I plan to do at some point, if I were to live my life over again, I would live it differently. And what I would do differently is I started off as a generalist, and I would have become obsessive around one thing and become one of the best in the world at one thing, and then branch off to being a generalist. I think doing it the opposite way gave me a lot of flexibility, but it never made me great at any particular thing.
Well, I disagree.
Let's fight about it.
You're one of the best podcast producers in the country.
But I am now specializing. I started by generalizing. I produce a podcast for Flex Lewis. He's a 7-time Mr. Olympia.
Okay. And
he does a lot of really interesting stuff. He's got a gym here. He's got a podcast. He's got a bunch of different businesses.
Yeah.
But all of those businesses, the gym itself, all of that live on the back of this man's reputation for becoming the very best at one thing. He became great at that, and that opened the door for him to have the opportunity to do many things. And
okay,
so
I see that.
By doing many things, you've watered yourself down so much. It's almost better to be like trapped in a situation where you're forced to be great at one thing, and then then you open the door and you got like the sunlight coming in, as opposed to. So like one of the reasons why I don't think I was as good as a magician as I could have been in my life, my friends told me this. They said, we had no other option. I have more successful magician friends. And they're like, we had no other option. There was nothing to fall back onto. We had to be great or we were going to die. And you could go into technology. You could go into all these other things that you wanted to do because you had all these, you weren't forced. You didn't burn the boats, you know? And so if I had to relive it again, I think I would make that change. I think I made a mistake tactically, but nobody tells you how to tactically live your life.
But, I mean, you can always adapt. So
yeah.
We went from podcasting to some pretty deep life conversation, but that's what I love.
I'm much more interested in the deep life. I mean, I live in the podcast thing. If you can ask me any podcast question, I'll tell you the truth. your question you asked, okay, what should people be focusing on when they're starting a podcast? Differentiator should be a big factor. Having a solid base, getting on other shows and building strong relationships. All of those are like some basic things, but ultimately it comes down to like adding value to other people's lives. And if you have no interest in that, then this is probably not the right place for you, because it's audience based. And so it's similar, like, don't start a restaurant if you don't want to serve a crowd. Like, don't start a podcast if you have nothing to share or don't want to like add value to people's lives.
No, that's a great point. Now I'm thinking, what value am I adding to people's lives? No, I mean, my audience loves the financial part, and I don't mind talking about that. But I've been blessed and lucky to meet some great people, and I have great conversations with them.
Why do you know so many rock stars?
I've met a couple that are good friends of mine, and I've networked with some of them as well.
So it's just like you met a couple rock stars and they introduced you to other rock stars?
Pretty much, yeah.
So in meeting rock stars, what when people go like, hey, what do you do? Which, by the way, I think is a terrible question, because it's not.
Yeah.
It's the better question would be like, who are you, or what do you value?
I don't even know the answer to any of these questions.
What do you say when the rock star goes, so what do you do?
Financial advisor.
Okay.
Yeah. So our mutual friend Brent Fitz is, they talk about 6 degrees of separation. I think he's at the most 2 degrees of separation from anyone in music. He is networked better than anyone I know in that field. And
he's also one of the nicest people.
Yeah.
He's wildly nice.
I've talked about this before on some of my podcasts. I love people who are humble. I love people who are amazing at what they do, and they're super humble. He's in Modern Drummer and Rolling Stone, one of the top 10 touring drummers in the world, but he'll tell you, hey, my friend here, he's the best drummer I know. And I'm like, but you're the one on stage. He doesn't care. I know some chefs here who've been on Iron Chef, and they're like, you got to go to my friend's restaurant. This guy's amazing. I'm like, but you're on Iron Chef. That takes a lot of humility to be amazing at what you do and to still acknowledge people who are great at other things.
Do you think, going back to that, you don't reach fulfillment when you cross the finish line thing, do you think maybe these guys have reached the finish line and then they cross it and they go like, oh, this didn't deliver what I thought it would be, and so maybe I shouldn't be like, I'm the very best drummer in the world, because I know it doesn't do anything for me, and instead, like, maybe I need to figure out something else. I wonder if that has impacted their life.
That has. I mean, John Douglas talked a little bit about that, growing up and, looking up to Aerosmith and working with them and then getting to play a full show.
Are you saying I should go watch that episode?
That's what I'm saying. Go back. And the Michael Jackson story was pretty
so good.
Oh, it's pretty badass. And then he said at the end, he was like, there was a little bit of like, is this it? And I don't know how you solve that whole mystery to life so that you're not asking yourself when you reach a goal. I mean, what's the line? Success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure. So how do you get, success and reach the goal and be fulfilled? I don't know the answer to that.
It's really weird, the whole like, is this it? Because on one hand, like, we're always looking for more stimulation. We need more all the time. Probably one of the reasons we've got like cool equipment and stuff in this world is because humans are never satisfied with the equipment we have, right? We're always like, what's next? I want better. But then, like, on the other hand, I see people that are into stuff that is just not true a lot of the time. Like, I'll just call it woo. And I look at it and I'm like, man, you need more than what this life has to offer. Like, this isn't enough. Like, we have so much.
I've always said this, we live in an incredibly impatient world where I think because of technology and everything, everyone wants everything immediately. Everyone wants to do 10 sit-ups and have washboard abs. Everyone wants to work out for 2 days and be in amazing shape. And your point about podcasting, everything you're saying involves putting in work. And like Sean Kelly, grinding, and the kid's a machine, and he just records, and he has the energy to do that. And people don't realize that, you first thing you said, you need some luck. But that whole thing on luck, opportunity, and all this stuff, like, I think when you put in the time, God, the universe, whatever you believe in, blesses you with some luck when you do that. So I think it's important to put in the work, and most people don't want to because we're very impatient. And what was the word you just used as far as what were you just talking? The point of
fulfillment, or isn't it enough? Or
yeah, it's just I think we just live in a world where just everyone wants everything right away. And there was another word you used, and it just escaped my mind now too. But
Woo?
you did have Ric Flair here.
I did have Ric Flair here.
But it's just that it's that constant, never satisfied. We were talking about the equipment.
Oh, yeah.
With all that stuff, where sometimes you just have to take a step back and be grateful, and that's another key to success. It took me a long time to realize the importance of gratitude and how the human mind is incapable of being. So the two emotions that screw up our lives are fear and anger.
That's it? That's all we get?
Those are the two main emotions that screw up our lives.
Entitlement?
Entitlement was the word you used before. That's what I was thinking of.
Oh,
we live in
okay.
a very entitled world as well, where people just feel they have everything owed to them and they don't have to put in the work. That's a whole other topic. The two emotions I think that screw up our lives are fear and anger, that screw up our businesses, our relationships, and everything we don't want to do. So the key is to focus your mind on being grateful, because the human mind is not capable of being grateful and fearful at the same time. You can't be grateful and angry at the same time. So if you focus more of your mind on being grateful, you're eliminating those two emotions that screw up our lives.
I like thinking of emotions as triggers for, they're as signals of things to do. So like fear being, you need to prepare for something, something's coming, is what fear means. And anger means somebody broke a rule that I have, and I need to evaluate that rule. Because generally it's my rule and not theirs. But that's my process on handling those emotions.
Yeah. I mean, it's easier said than done.
Oh yeah. Especially when you're in the emotion. Like I think that's like the value of meditation is it helps you get out of yourself occasionally. Like it helps you observe how you're feeling so that if you are angry, you can remove yourself from that and look at yourself and be like, oh, I'm angry. I've been there before. That's going to pass. But if you've never been able to like look at yourself externally, boy, that's a hard thing to do.
Oh, self-awareness is 90% of it. If you have to have the self-awareness. And to your point about it, even if it's not gratitude, some meditation to breathe a little bit better, to reduce those emotions so you have clarity when you're making these decisions and thinking about these things.
Yeah.
So step 2 on starting a podcast.
We've solved the
We've just gotten way off the topic.
Doing the podcast is much harder than complete life fulfillment. That's which is what we answered the rest of it.
No, it's
we mentioned Ric Flair, and when he came, I'm very fortunate, speaking of gratitude, to have a lot of really cool people come through my world, and I get to eavesdrop on crazy conversations. And we had Ric Flair come in. And before the podcast, I was like, I want to ask him one question. And it was, you've created this character for sports entertainment. Has it changed who you are? Or are you still who you were, and then you occasionally have to play the character? And it was important that I asked him off mic, because when he's on mic, he has to be on, right? And he went, I totally don't know who I was before I became this. And the significance to me of that is like, so now he has completely been absorbed by the character that he created.
Yeah.
And it gives me hope in the idea that if I'm not who I want to be, and all of us have made mistakes, all of us have regrets. If you don't have regrets, you're not reflecting. But it means that you can decide to be somebody else. You could create another character that might be better than who you are today. And it's possible to turn yourself into that character. So even though it happened to him in a theatrical sense, it still gives me hope that I could turn into a better version of myself at any point.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
That's a really deep point. Sometimes you have to create that character. I think we all have it in us, but again, going back to fear, that keeps us from doing. Fear of the unknown, fear of what people are going to think, fear of failure, fear of this. And it's like people don't. What's the line? The majority of people are not successful because they're worried about what other people are going to. Yeah. We don't do what we want to do because we're worried about what other people are going to think.
Yeah. And reputation says so.
Yeah, and tied into that is the less you give a shit, the easier your life is. It kind of plays off the same theme, which is you just have to, going back to podcasting, going back to putting out content, which even Gary Vee talks about this all the time, about most people don't do it because they're worried about the comment section.
Yeah. And the irony is the ones that blow up are the ones that they don't care. So a lot of the most successful podcasts intentionally will not read comments. They will not look at the quantity of likes. They won't look at any of it.
And they just keep going.
They just keep going. And they're crazy successful. Rogan says specifically, I won't read comments. Lex Friedman created a plugin so that he can't see the metrics on his podcast. And he has one of the best podcasts in the world. And it's like, they did this intentionally. Like the audience, that thing I said earlier, the audience controls who you are. You belong to them too, right? So they literally closed the door on the audience and said, nope, I'm going to be making this for me. I'm gonna have the conversations with the people I want to have, and those things become super authentic, and we can see the authenticity in it. And then we turn on the nightly news, and we're like, they're definitely reading off a teleprompter from a message that was required for them to say by an advertiser that they had nothing to do with, And we can see through the authenticity in a moment, which is one of the reasons. Like people ask me all the time right now lately about this Haktua girl because she's blown up. And I think part of it is the fact that like she said something completely unguarded that you would say to your friends that you would never say if you knew it was going to go out to 1 billion people. She was so authentic.
What's amazing though is there's been so many viral moments like that, but how many people you're like, oh, remember this viral thing, and then they just disappear.
Yeah.
She took that, and I don't have a jealous bone in my body. And some people are like, oh, this is ridiculous. I'm like, no, it's not ridiculous. It's called taking a moment and actually taking advantage of it. I admire what she's done and what she's created by taking 10, 15 seconds of a viral thing, and now has the #3 podcast in the US.
Yes. I also suspect. So I have only suspicion. I don't know any of this.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think that she's a lot smarter than people think she is.
Agree.
I also think somebody came in and that knew what they were doing, that had a team behind them, and said, here's the roadmap. Are you willing to follow it?
I've heard a lot of this has been orchestrated and scripted, but
I don't think the moment was scripted. But I think after that moment, somebody came in and said, I can help you. Do you want to do it? And she was smart enough to say, let's go.
What do they say? Everyone is presented with at least $1 million idea in their lives, but some people shut that door and don't say, Jim Carrey in the movie Yes Man. Just say yes and see what happens.
Yeah.
So
people are angry at her though because they're jealous because they've said something stupid that hasn't made them famous.
I say something stupid every 10 minutes. But so she threw out the pitch at the Mets at the baseball game, and people were furious. They're like, what is this girl? The Haktua girl's throwing out the pitch. And she did it to raise money for an animal shelter or for animal awareness or some sort of,
That's good because I wasn't even aware of animals until just now. It's working.
And people just were like, it's amazing the anger and the jealousy of people who are like, this is ridiculous. What's she doing this for? Well, if you saw what the charity she was doing it for, maybe if you got your head out of your ass, you'd actually admire what she's doing.
Yeah.
But,
there's a lot less scarcity than people think there is in the world. Like scarcity is what creates value. Scarcity and utility. This is, by the way, you should probably be talking to me about what creates value. You're the money guy. But I believe that it's scarcity and utility. And so I used to think, hey, there's a set money supply, and if they've got a bunch of it, I don't. And that's a real problem for me. And then I'm like, but how does this stock market keep going up? How does it keep increasing in value? Like part of it could be that we're printing money, but then it was like this aha moment of, well, no, people are adding value in utility all the time. They create a company. That company that adds more value to the world because they've made things better for people. And that's how things can continually go up in value all the time, which completely removes the whole idea of scarcity within that. And so when somebody's jealous or envious of somebody who became famous overnight, it's this false belief that, well, because they're famous, now there's less room for somebody else to succeed, which is not the case. It just means that the bar has changed maybe a little bit, but the opportunity is still there.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. I mean, you've told me about so many podcasts that I've never even heard of that are just amazing, have huge followings, have great sponsors and all this stuff, and there's plenty to go around.
I think we're just at the beginning, which is such a weird thing when it's a crazy industry and we're just getting started.
So there will be one, if not 10 people bigger than Joe Rogan 10 years from now.
Yeah. I mean, when Walmart started, everyone's just like, well, nobody's ever going to be able to compete with them. And then Amazon starts, and now everyone's like looking at Amazon and being like, well, there's no way anybody's going to be able to compete with them. Well, it's just a paradigm shift. Like they figured out a different paradigm than what Walmart had. Walmart figured out a different paradigm than what the mom and pop shops had, right? It's like, well, somebody's going to figure it out. Like, it's just a matter of time.
That's why I love, and it's kind of the Warren Buffett and William O'Neill from Investors Business Daily. They were just big, like, don't bet against America, the rah, 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 USA, USA speech. But there's like a 14-year-old kid at Caltech right now that's coming up with an invention that's going to change our lives 10 years from now, that type of thing. And throughout history, I've noticed that every big move in the stock market comes from an invention or innovation that revolutionizes our lives. So start with the railroads. They took us from point A to point B. You go from New York to L.A. You know, what was the Louis C.K. had a bit on that? Like when you started with the people in New York and you had to walk to L.A. By the time you got there, it was a whole different crew. People have died. Some people got pregnant. Like it's a whole different thing than what you started with. Now you get from point A to point B. What do? They help innovate our lives, but the word is efficiency. The word is, you know, helping things to move faster and all that. So then what's the next big invention, you know, throughout history? Airlines, television, drug discoveries, the PC, the internet, smartphones, now AI. The list is endless of what do they all have in common is they help enhance in productivity.
Yeah.
And that is what I've noticed has helped a lot of big moves when you asked about why the market keeps going up, because there's always inventions and things that are revolutionizing our lives. And maybe now seems like podcasting is taking over the way we consume media, the way we consume information. And Paul Tudor Jones is one of the best money managers, you know, still lives, who's ever lived, but still is still living. He talks about you either adapt, evolve, or die. And I think not just in the stock market, in life in general, you have to adapt to what is going on in the world. You know,
you mentioned Warren Buffett.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm derailing.
No, this whole conversation is derailing.
Yeah. And then step 3 is you monetize the podcast. Didn't Warren Buffett just like sell a bunch of stuff and is sitting on a bunch of cash now?
Yeah.
Why?
He has a certain style. He is a very value style. There's like some people, like I'm a growth manager, so I'm looking for more growth stocks, and I'm okay to pay a little bit. I believe you get what you pay for.
We are just
my logo to a screensaver to just.
This is why there should be somebody in the control booth, but there's not.
But that's okay. So the third step, the fourth time I met O.J. Simpson. So
Warren Buffett's got a different style.
He's got a value style, but he sticks to his discipline, like Graham and Dodd. And I don't know everything about Warren Buffett, but he has a certain style. And if they don't meet his criteria and he's got nothing to buy, he'll just keep it in cash, because he's also, for the last 10 or 15 years, you know what you'd get on your cash? 0. You could have $1 million in the bank, and at the end of the year, you get like 7 cents if you're lucky. Now you get 3, 4, 5%, you know, depending on where, you know, what you're putting it in. So he has a certain style and discipline, which I admire, and he's one of the best ever. And if he doesn't find what value, he's just going to keep it in cash until he does.
See, it's so easy to look at people that know things that you don't know. It's easy for me to look at him and see him doing this, and then me going, oh, this happened right around an election. Is it related to this? Is it related to that? It's very similar to like sailors, and they'd be like, well, a sparrow flew overhead right before we had a big storm. And I'm just like, so what does it mean? I'm curious, but it could just be that. It could be like, look, he runs on his algorithm that he's put together that says, when this is happening, I do this. Yeah. And he sticks to that, and it has worked for him, so he's going to keep sticking to that. It could be that simple, but I'm trying to like read the tea leaves and be like, what is he trying to say about our world's economy?
I mean, the people he is a huge, you know, literally disciples and following. When he raises cash, people will follow that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Do whatever works for you. But, you know, he's just has a certain style that he sticks with. The other thing that's amazing about him is the 8th wonder of the world, Andre the Giant. Oh. No, the 8th wonder of the world growing up, I thought was Andre the Giant. It's compound interest. And, you know, the story is he was only worth 50 million at age 60, and now he's worth 100 billion. That's the beauty of, you know, they say right now, if you start at 18 and put whatever it is a week, I don't know, 50 or $100 a week, like by the time you're 60, it's like 2 point something million. And again, plug it into the calculator. But the beauty of starting earlier is with compound interest. It's that whole hockey stick of, look up any chart where people, again, don't have the patience. They don't want to, I want $1 million tomorrow. And it just slow and steady. And then it just compounds and just, it's amazing what that can do.
Yeah. I should take more interest in compound interest. I'm always interested in the fact that I have zero interest in money. It's very weird to me that I don't care about it.
That's a good thing, though.
I guess it's great to not be interested in a thing.
It's better than the opposite, which is people who are obsessed. Again, it's a pet peeve of mine. They're obsessed, and you know what the worst part is? They'll never, ever do anything with their money. They're like, oh, save it for a rainy day, or, work hard now so you can enjoy it later. And you know what happens? They get to later and they still don't enjoy it. So my philosophy is work hard now and enjoy it while you're mobile.
Yeah. And invest like a senator.
Yeah. Because when we talk about the greats, I forgot it, but we've talked about Druckenmiller, we talked about Warren Buffett, Paul Tudor Jones. I forgot Pelosi. Pelosi's the best.
Didn't some kid just write a script that let you automatically invest in whatever she's investing in?
Yeah, because they do have to disclose. That's a whole other thing. I mean, it should not be legal, but they get to vote on it. So why would you vote on? Hey, I make $180,000 a year and I'm worth $300 million. Why would I vote against that? But it shouldn't be allowed. But because it is allowed, they have to disclose their trades. And there's actually a couple senators or Congress people who are actually better than her the last few years. Yeah, but people follow them, and
they seem to have, some kind of algorithm in place that it really helps them.
It's impeccable timing.
They're fantastic. I got into a very peaceful debate about abortion, as those go, and the conversation steered to, they could ratify the Constitution, and they're like, nobody ever ratifies the Constitution. So we looked up when was the last time something was changed in the Constitution, and it wasn't crazy long ago, and it was them giving themselves pay raises. And we're just like, ew.
They vote on their own pay raises.
Yeah, it's so gross.
Hey, you're making 180. Let's vote, and you're going to make 200. Why would you vote no?
Yeah.
And then the next year, let's make 220 or whatever. And it's just, people get worked up about politics. I actually wrote this on my blog, joefahmy.com. I wrote an article called, it's speaking of Warren Buffett, separate your politics from your investing. Because we just had the election, and Warren Buffett has a great line, if you don't separate your politics from your investing, you're making a big mistake. Because, in my opinion, the market, it doesn't matter who's president. The market moves on earnings and interest rates. Yeah, there's some policies that could matter, but for the most part, it doesn't matter. But it was such a divisive, and still is, and people got very animated on both sides, and it screwed up with what they're doing in the stock market because they just really were mixing the two. And it's very important to separate the two because going back to the emotions, higher emotions, and you don't like one side or the other, and then you say, screw this with the stock market, when it's really like you have to learn to separate those two.
So earnings and interest rates are the two
main things, in my opinion, that move the stock market.
That's interesting. I only recently learned about the velocity of money. I didn't know that was the thing until recently. But while I totally get earnings, and I think that's great, and the market can help figure that out, the interest rate one pisses me off because it's controlled by the Federal Reserve Bank, which is not federally owned, has no reserves, and is not a bank.
That's you. There are people who have gone on, they've made their lives going on rants about the Fed, where I just say, I'm not going to change the world, so I just accept it and I adapt to what's going on. So in 2022, when they went from zero, so we were at zero for the longest time. And because after the global financial crisis, 08, 09, they kept rates pretty much at zero from 09 to 2021, 2022. Yeah, so whatever that is, 13, 14 years, I can't even do math, and I'm a math guy. Anyway, they kept rates at zero, and then they finally did something that they've never done in the history of the market. They raised it 500 basis points or 5% in a year. They've never raised rates that quickly, that fast. And when they're doing that, it affects money supply. It affects other investors. Now it went from Tina, there is no alternative, to now you have an alternative. Because when I talked earlier about if you have round numbers, $1 million in the bank and you're earning 7 cents, now I can make $50,000 on that with no risk. So now you have an alternative. So now people take money out of the markets because they're raising rates, and it
incentivizes people to save.
Yeah, and it also it doesn't incentivize, it people will take less risk, because I know some people who are perfectly happy with 3 or 4% with no risk.
Are you a Keynesian economics guy, or are you like an Austrian economics guy, or is that not even, you don't even worry about that? That's not part of the job.
It's not part of my job. Yeah. I'm more of just, I love finding companies. So your Walmart example, what causes a stock to go up for the most part is if you're growing your earnings and sales. When you take the biggest winners throughout history, Walmart, McDonald's, Home Depot, Microsoft, Apple, the list is endless of the greatest stocks. The main thing they have in common is growing their earnings and sales. The Walmart example started with literally 3 aisles in like a small sort of hardware store. And then same with Home Depot. And then now you expand, and now you expand. Now you go into Home Depot. Where can I find this? That's aisle 57A, because what happens is you increase your products and sales and your earnings and so forth. So now I'm jumping between Walmart and Home Depot, but you start with something small and then you increase what you're selling. Now you take that concept and you replicate it here, and you replicate it from Arkansas to, this state, and then this state and this state. Now you grow domestically, and you're adding more and more. Same thing with Home Depot. It's like 3 stores in Atlanta, then more stores and more stores and more products and whatever. I'm rambling, but the whole point is, what causes a company for the most part to go up is growing your earnings and sales.
Which I'm assuming aligns with innovation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're not innovating and you suck,
then how the heck are you making money?
Yeah.
Outside of fraud.
Outside of cooking your books. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but that's for the most part what causes things to go up. And that's what I'm concerned with. I don't really get involved with jobless claims and interest rates too much. I follow it, but like CPI and inflation, I try to keep it simple.
Yeah. I don't know. I like the cultural, I don't like them. Actually, I follow the cultural impact that the wealth divide seems to have on society. I think it's fascinating to watch both sides villainize each other. And I think it's also interesting to look at both sides as though they're heroes. Look, the rich, although they're villainized constantly for being rich, which is not a crime, and honestly, kind of hard to do without adding value to other people's lives. Not impossible, but really hard to do without being a decent human being. And yet they're constantly villainized for what they do. And then the poor are constantly villainized for being lazy and all this stuff. And they're the ones that are actually doing the hardest. Well, I shouldn't say the hardest jobs. They're doing the grunt work that nobody really wants to do. They're willing to do it. So it's fascinating where people are like, eat the rich, and it's very weird. I currently demonize the government more than anything else because I'm a taxation theft guy, but that's a whole different topic.
Yeah,
we don't have to.
So
breach.
The third way to monetize a podcast.
Yeah.
So we talked about starting a podcast, building an audience.
Yeah, and we didn't even go down that whole road.
No, we just
So I have 3 books that are going to be out before the end of this year. And so one is about building the perfect podcast studio, which is all about how this place is made, why screensavers shouldn't go on, things of that nature.
When is this going to be? Where will this be available? Will they be ebooks or like Amazon?
They're going to be Amazon. Well, I'm going to sell them as an ebook. I'm also going to sell them as an audiobook. But initially they're just going to be print.
Okay.
And they will be available on Amazon. But if your listeners want to connect, and I'll give them the first crack at it, have them send an email to info@originpodcaststudios.com. So info@originpodcaststudios, and I'll make sure that you have first crack at it. And I'll even give you like a big old discount. But yeah, first book's going to be on building perfect studio, and it goes deep into cameras and mics and switchers and everything.
Okay.
Lighting. And then the second book is on growing your audience. And man, did we not touch upon that enough, because we got into the meaning of life.
Yeah.
And then the third book is on monetizing. And I really do think they kind of stand on top of each other, where like if you don't have that base of a platform,
it's a normal progression. It makes
progression.
Sense.
Yeah, it's a progression.
Yeah, we didn't touch enough on the 2, and we haven't even gotten to 3.
Yeah.
And we're
an hour and 20 minutes.
Which we've had more than, the happy hour's gone. So, there's the happy hour there.
It's over there.
So it's happy hour and 20 minutes.
Man, speaking of AI, so when you sent me that, like all of this is AI on the sides. You sent me a square that was just that circle.
Yeah.
And AI filled in the rest. It's amazing.
I I've had people tell me when the thing was behind me, they're like, that's a cool bar you have in your house. Or is that your basement? Is that your mom's basement? Is that your house? And I'm like, no, it's just a logo.
So there's these things called volumes, so back in the day it was just green screens. If you wanted to be on anything, you'd just be on a green screen, which is like how the Weather Channel used to, you do it that way. And then recently they've come out with this thing called a volume, which is essentially a giant video wall. And the advantage of it is if I'm wearing glasses or anything reflective, the video wall reflects that image. And so I'm actually there, and I don't have to match a color to the back wall or anything like that.
So the color doesn't screw up the image.
If I'm wearing a helmet and you see the reflection of, you see the background, and they can take a camera that moves and have it control what's on the video screen, so you can get accurate motion. It's how the TV show The Mandalorian was made.
Oh, okay.
And there's a place right down the street that has one. They're incredibly expensive. But I was just in there, and he goes, "Yeah, they built this beautiful set that was real. They've got a giant video wall. They could make whatever set they want, but they built a real set of a storefront with glass, and then on the video wall, on the volume behind them, they created New York City. They put basically a giant picture of New York City, so that when they filmed the storefront in the glass, you'd see a reflection of New York City. So it was like a perfectly accurate New York City shot in Las Vegas. I think it's so cool.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah. When we do this the next time, can we wear helmets?
I think it's a must. Yeah.
We have to.
And it's for our protection.
Of course.
Yeah.
So monetizing, it's a whole other
Monetizing, it's a whole other thing. The number one monetization strategy revolves around ads, attention. Google makes a fortune on selling ads. So if you build a large enough audience, people are going to want to have access to that audience. Sometimes that is them wanting to sit down across from you and talk to you. Like, let's be real. The reason Trump was on Joe Rogan's podcast is because he wanted access to that audience. So that was essentially an ad. I've heard recently that Kamala Harris paid like tens of millions of dollars for different endorsements from celebrities and things. Like, all she was trying to do is access their audience.
Okay.
And so that's the biggest and most common way. The most lucrative ways take a lot more work, but they usually involve selling your own product. And the reason that's more lucrative is because you make all the margin on your own product. While if you're selling an ad for somebody, you're only making a percentage of that. But there's also, there's like 30 different strategies on making money and monetizing a podcast. It could be affiliate links that you put in the description line. Recently, people have even used their graphic for their podcast, and they've left space there, and they're selling real estate on their own graphic. So it'll say like, the Joe Rogan Experience brought to you by Call of Duty, the video game. And so they're even using that real estate for sale.
And all this will be covered. You're going to have 3 books that are...
so one's on each one of those sections. So
they're all going to be out by the end of the year?
By the end of the year.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm going to start tomorrow.
We'll put the links below this, or when it's ready, I
can update those links. I'll do it.
Yeah, I'm sure you can. This has been fun.
This has been fun.
We just sort of took like a lot of different turns, but I appreciate all your help with this. This is amazing.
It's my pleasure, and I'll be back the next time a guest cancels.
We might have like several parts to this.
They finally got to the part about lighting.
I know. No, I appreciate your expertise and your knowledge has been. I'm excited for this. I want to be consistent and put together a great product, like you said, and connect with the audience. And if they like it, great. If it turns into something, great.
And if not, you have great conversations with people. That's one of the cool things about it is like the worst case scenario is it's kind of fun. Like that's the worst case.
If I do this for a year and have 50 fun conversations with my friends, then okay.
It's great.
It's not exactly a bad thing.
Yeah. Good seeing you, and let's get out of here.
All right. Thank you.